Hi, I'm Lois Powell.
And I'm Susan Schuler, and we're here to share tips, tricks, ideas, and resources
To help you discover what's your story. Susan, how did you get started in genealogy?
I feel like I was always a little bit interested. Even as a child, I was the one who would want grandma to tell stories. And my grandparents were a little resistant to telling the stories. In fact, once my grandma said to me, that's why people came to America. They wanted to get away from that. And I think that only made me more curious. And so I tried doing a family tree on paper. And then when I was an adult, I became a librarian and I discovered the local history room of the library where I was working. And I realized that my family was in a lot of those books. Like my family was deep in the town where I grew up and where I lived. And I've just been hooked ever since. How about you, Lois? How did you get started in genealogy?
Well, honestly, I had relatives that were already starting genealogy trees, but they were all handwritten. There were no resources or facts that I knew to be true or not true, so they were all family stories. And some of them turned out to be pretty interesting. And I said, I wonder why Uncle John seems to be somebody else's son. And that's what got me started.
Ooh, a mystery.
A mystery is what began my career in genealogy. Career being the opportune word here, it's actually a hobby.
Excellent. So, what do you think is some good advice for somebody who's just getting started in genealogy? Like, what's the best way to get started or off on the right foot?
Well, I would start, as I said, see if anybody in your family is already doing something. That's the easiest. Take what they have. Don't necessarily trust it, but take what they have. Interview family, especially right now. Whatever social media you use, whether it's a telephone, whether it's Facebook, whatever you use to stay in contact with your family, reach out to all your relatives, even though you're not close to them. Reach out to everyone you know and take time to interview them. Tell them about what you're trying to do and ask them for information. You have anything you want to add to that, Susan?
Yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly about reaching out to family that you're not close to because maybe that's a good way to get close to them, especially your older relatives. I would start asking them questions now, like where was grandma born and what do you remember about her, even if it seems insignificant, like where did grandma go to school? Those things put people in a time and a place, and that's a clue.
And even if they say, like you said,
Yeah.
that's why people came to America. Okay, maybe they don't want to talk about it. Probably another relative somewhere is going to give you a clue why they don't want to talk about it.
Yeah. And I think another important thing to do is look around your house, clean out your closet. Where are the scrapbooks? Where are grandma's photos? Are they labeled? I happen to think that I was really lucky in the beginning of my genealogy because my great grandma was a hoarder. And when they cleaned out her house, when they were finally getting ready to sell it, a long time after she died, there were boxes and boxes of things that nobody wanted to sift through. And I still have things I'm discovering now. Just the other day, I found a letter I didn't know I had from like 1915, and now I know who those people are that that wrote to her.
Wow.
But back when I first got that letter, I had no idea who Aunt Clara was, but now I know.
And that's a real jackpot find because you may go months with nothing, and then all of a sudden you'll find something that gives you the information you want. So once you find all those pieces of material, the other thing you need to do is organize them.
Mm-hmm.
You know what? Very inexpensive, simple notebooks. Just put them in notebooks. You can organize them by family, organize them by date, whatever you're most comfortable with, because more than likely, once you get started, you're going to change your organization anyways.
Right.
So get started organizing.
I don't think there's one particular way to organize. What works for you might not work for me. Like I said, I have a lot of things that my grandma had. I found receipts for funerals that she paid for that when I found them, I didn't know who they were, but now I know who those relatives are. And I've saved those receipts, because I know that this is Uncle Jacob's funeral. So I have a lot of things in sheet protectors, in binders, or in some things in file folders. But what works for me might not work for somebody else. So, do what works best for you and your brain and do what you can keep up with. If something's
Really
too
good
complicated, you're not going to keep it up and then you're going to have paper everywhere.
Really good point. What you can keep up with, but be sure to document. When I said I started with family who didn't really document everything, I didn't know what was true and what wasn't true. You start to learn that when you find receipts, funeral notices, etc. So that's the kind of information you want to make sure you keep track of, Because believe me, in 5 years, you're going to say, how did I get that information? I can't remember. Was that true or is that a story?
Yeah.
You're going to want to know that piece of information.
And I think the family stories are one of the reasons I do this. I want to hear the family stories. I think you just have to listen to them with a grain of salt and then decide what's provable. Like it might be great to say that grandma went to Wales in, 1906, but unless you can find documentation that grandma went to Wales, it's still just a nice story.
And that's what brings people to life.
Absolutely.
Just knowing birth and death doesn't bring people to life. And those stories are true. In my husband's case, we were always told his mother went to Italy on a trip and she met the Pope. Well, I finally found the records that she did in fact go to Italy and she did in fact take a cruise. There is no record anywhere that she ever met the Pope. But it's a great family story.
No photographic evidence that she met the Pope.
No evidence whatsoever. But she did make the trip.
That's great. Yeah.
So once you do that, you're going to create a little tree so you know what's going on. And I think everybody probably knows enough about basic trees. It's your grandmother, her children, their children, et cetera, and keeping track.
I like to say it's birth, marriage, places, and death. Like, try to learn where they were born, when were they born, who did they marry, where did they marry, and then where did they die, and where are they buried? Because that could be two different places.
But keep the stories.
Oh, absolutely.
You still need the stories to go with it.
To me, the birth, the dates, all of that stuff is the bones, and then the stories put flesh on the person.
That's a great way to put it because literally that's what it does.
Yeah.
It makes them come alive. It does put the flesh on the person.
Yeah.
That's a great way to do it.
Yeah.
All right. So what else can you do getting started?
I think a great thing to do would be to find all those old photos and see if they're labeled. A great way to get those old photos is to call your relatives near and far and say, do you have grandma's photos? Who has Aunt Betty's photos? And share them. Your relatives are your relatives, but they're also somebody else's relatives. And being territorial about, grandma's wedding album isn't helpful to either one of you, because I'm sure that your other relatives have things that you don't. And why not make it a shareable situation so that you can have things and they can have things?
And most of you probably will recognize the fact that not a lot of people are good at labeling their pictures.
Oh.
So you're going to find a whole bunch of pictures and you're not going to know who those people are. Don't throw them away. Hold on to them because as you get more experience, as you meet more people, you're going to find ways to get some of those photos identified. Some will never get identified. But I made the mistake when my family died. My sister and I went through bags of photos and we dumped them all. And that was a big mistake because they're lost.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there were photos there that I could have identified and used.
Yeah. There's always somebody that will know who they are, an older cousin, an aunt, the oldest relative in your family. I was really lucky. My aunt's neighbor knew my great grandmother, and she was a much older woman, but she helped me identify a couple of people that I had no idea who they were.
And that's lucky. And always better to be lucky.
Yeah. It really is a group project sometimes.
It really is. Once you get started and you start doing that organizing, now you can start going online and doing research.
Mm-hmm.
And there's lots of places you can go online to do research.
Sure. I hope everybody knows that the library has a library edition of Ancestry that you can come here and use anytime we're open. And you can always come and ask for assistance if you need it. Just go to the front desk and ask for Susan, or if you want to make an appointment, we can make sure that we have other help here. Call, email.
And also Fold 3.
We had Fold 3 also.
Which is a lot about military history. So if you get somebody in your family that's been in the military, Fold 3 is a real good asset, a real good resource. And as Susan said, it's available here at the library. If you have your own subscriptions, there are many websites out there that you can go to and use even from home. But if you want some help, come on into the library.
Yeah. And I have, hopefully by the end of next month, I'll have another database. That's a surprise right now. We'll save that to get you to listen to us next time.
I'm going to come in next month and
it's
find
in the hopper.
Ooh, very good.
And Lois, while we're talking about these online trees, I think that maybe now's a good time for a disclaimer that watch everything with a grain of salt and to use your judgment. If there's a woman who on your tree, she did not have her first child when she was 9, and she did not have her last child when she was 58. Like, use common sense. If your ancestor died in 1806, they were not in the Civil War. Common sense.
Good points. Very good points. Another one would be, if you find a family tree out there and it looks great, and you find that you're related to Charlemagne, I would question it.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of history. It's very difficult to find. It doesn't mean you're not related to Charlemagne, but I wouldn't just take that tree and trust it. I would actually do a lot of research. So common sense prevails, well, when anything you do online, right? Whether it's doing family research or whether it's doing your financials, whatever you do,
most
always
things.
use common sense.
Yeah. And those genealogy shows are wonderful. I enjoy them very much. But they're 45 minutes long. They're not showing you the 6 months of research that went into, connecting Valerie Bertinelli with her very famous ancestor. They're not showing you the hours and hours and hours that some poor little researcher was sitting there going through the dusty books and records.
And another good point around that, when you watch those genealogy research or genealogy programs, you notice they fly them to London, they fly them to Paris. Well, I don't have an unlimited budget, and I can't just pick up and say, oh, I think I'll go to Paris and check out Aunt Joan. But a field trip you can take is go to a cemetery. If you know your family's from a particular area, like Susan mentioned, her family's all from New York, you may know some basic cemetery facts. Go to that cemetery. You'd be surprised. You can actually have fun in a cemetery. I know, it sounds a little bizarre, but you can. For example, when I went to search on my father's side, we found a huge tree had grown up around the tombstone. I actually have a picture of it. It was fascinating. That same cemetery was a small private cemetery. It was in disrepair, and there was no one to care for it. So we were able to financially help them, not a lot, but they were doing a fundraiser, so we were able to assist there, and that helps the cemeteries. Similarly, there are other cemeteries that maybe you're looking for a stone. In my case, it was at Matilda. And you can have a lot of fun with that, because now I'm dating myself, but if you've ever heard the song Waltzing Matilda, you can have a lot of fun with it. So there's opportunities like that.
Sure. When I plan my trips back home, I always leave a day or two to go to cemeteries. Sometimes it'll be because if it's an ancestor I didn't know I was related to until recently, since my last trip back, I'll make time to go find that person. And I always bring a little water and a brush so that I can clean that area if I need to clean that tombstone. I would never use anything more than water, though. And I photograph the gravestone, and I also try to photograph my surroundings. Like, that big oak tree is probably not going to move. And then the next time I go back, could be years, or if I'm trying to explain to my cousin how to get there, then I have some directional points. And also GPS. Now you can GPS it, which is even better.
An additional thought around that photographing the gravestone. You may find that gravestone, even when you clean it, is very difficult to read.
Mm-hmm.
But when you take a picture of it, you're going to find out an awful lot shows up in the photograph that you couldn't see. So always take a picture of it for several reasons. Cemeteries are a great find. The other thing you may locate is, in my husband's family, he's from the Midwest, and we were at one family cemetery, and we were just out driving, and all of a sudden we saw another small cemetery, and I saw a family name, and I said, I believe that's your family name. And so we went into this very small cemetery. It couldn't have been 20, 30 graves. And it turned out to be a whole nother branch of his family. Now, you're
that you
not
didn't know
always
about?
that lucky. Didn't know anything about it.
Wow.
We just happened to be, okay, he lives way out in the country, his family. So, but we didn't know anything about it. And we got lucky. Sometimes you won't get so lucky. But you can have a great time out there.
I call that genealogy serendipity. The reason my family lives in this part of Florida is my dad's aunt and uncle passed away and left them a house. I was a little girl. I knew my uncle had passed away. I knew that he might be in the cemetery where my father is now buried. And the lady gave me directions, but unfortunately his place had been moved due to some disrepair. And so I must have walked that cemetery for miles. And then I looked up and he's buried right like 2 rows away from my dad. Like,
oh my gosh.
Like, it was a total surprise. Like, he was there under my nose the whole time.
And see, those are some of the fun things, because all of a sudden you go, oh, that was fun. What else can I find?
Yeah, exactly. And it gets you so,
you'll
make
find
connections.
You'll find that when you go online too. You may find that all of a sudden you look up and it's 2:00 in the morning.
Yeah.
Because you had a hit and you've been just researching like crazy and having fun.
Yeah.
There are other days it won't go that well.
No, and this is not a hobby for people who want instant gratification. Like, you should take up drawing. Like, um, my great grandparents were married in New York City in 1910, and I looked for that marriage record for a good 15 years. I found it, but I looked for it for 15 years. They were finished. Their names were spelled atrociously. Even Olga was spelled wrong. But you have to persevere.
Persevere. And yes, spelling is another thing. Always check different spellings because you're going to find that in the graveyard too.
Yeah. Also, spelling is very fluid because, believe it or not, a lot of our ancestors didn't read and write, and they didn't have to. Our society now is very document driven. They didn't have to give their name, their email, their identification like we do. It's a different world. So if you're McMurray, I would do all the different variants of that last name.
And it could be Scottish, it could be Irish.
There you go.
Who
You
knows?
never know.
So do a lot of research.
Yeah.
And have fun with it. That's the real idea here, is you can have fun with history. I never thought so. I hated history.
Aww.
But you can have fun with history
totally
when it's
can.
personal and it's part of you.
Absolutely. It's a lot of fun. It's a mystery that needs solving, and it's your story.
So that's our conclusion. Go out and find out. What's your story?
If you have questions or comments, please leave them for us in the comments. And if you have a brick wall that you would like our help with, let us know, and maybe we'll talk about it next time. Thanks so much for listening.
Bye-bye.